From marrying himself to drinking Hennessy during halftime, these are the NBA's worst crashouts. And first, we've got Draymond Green, who has become notorious for starting brawls and kicking balls. Draymond has a very unique skill set. On the one hand, he has a very high basketball IQ and awareness, but then you have his hot-headed tendencies, which seem to cancel the good out with the bad. You could say that he is self-destructive. He seems to always find himself in the middle of a fight, whether he started it or not. There is a fine line between getting in your opponent's head and going too far, and Draymond seems to find himself on the wrong side of it more often than not. Like when he took offense at Rudy Gobert grabbing Klay Thompson and put him in a headlock straight out of WWE, or when he swung and connected with Yusuf Nurkic's face. He has created compilation of fights that are longer than some players' career highlight reels. I mean, who else in history has become known for the guy who kicks people in the balls? Just ask Steven Adams, who had to deal with it not once, but twice. In the 2016 finals, he was suspended for Game 5 for accruing too many flagrants, and still blames this for the finals defeats while not taking any accountability. But a couple of years later, he got into a scuffle with teammate Kevin Durant, who left the team in the following offseason, costing them even further more titles. While there are many different reasons why Durant may have left the team, his argument with Dre definitely could have been one of the main factors, as is previously stated. Speaking of his incident with a fellow Warrior, there was a more relevant and recent moment that made headlines. At a practice in 2022, Green punched the stupid out of Jordan's face, and not in the playful way. Poole is not on the team anymore, which is certainly a part of it, but he still seems to be a bit salty about how it went down. I mean, Draymond just hid away from the team to make a fucking documentary saying that he wasn't really sorry about it. He's created rifts not just with other players in the league, but also on his own team. But throughout all of those moments, Green keeps his fiery demeanor. Over the years, he has tried therapy, counseling, and whatever else they want just to help him, but that chip on his shoulder is still there. He walks on thin ice, but he will be remembered because of the compelling way that he has cemented his position in NBA history. But Draymond Green's so-called crash-out moments seem normal compared to what we have next. Because next is Dennis Rodman. And if you know the slightest thing about him, you know just how weird things get. From marrying himself to his unexpected relationship with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, Rodman has time and time again shocked the world with his ridiculous antics. But let's look at what made him such a special player to begin with. At just 6'7", Rodman would dominate the rebounding game like no one else. He was also a mean defender, winning 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards during this time, and he filled the void that championship-winning teams needed, namely the Bad Boys Pistons and the MJ Bulls. But although he was this essential piece to some of the greatest teams of all time, his reputation was defined by impulsive and crazy behavior. First things first, if you just took a glance at Rodman, you could tell he's different. He expressed himself in front of thousands using his stylish hair, but let's be real. After you saw him dive for a loose ball or lock in on defense, the focus shifted. There were no second thoughts when the ball was in play. His instinct was to attack, and I mean attack in every sense of the word. He attacked the ball like when he went 3 games with 0 points and a combined 77 boards, but he also had no fear when attacking players. Picking a fight with 7'7" George Marasan was definitely bold, but that's just how he played his game. Getting in his opponent's heads was a key piece to why he was so successful, because he ultimately didn't care. In fact, he probably just thought it was funny. He made split-second decisions and created fireworks, like when he kicked a cameraman on the baseline, which resulted in an 11-game suspension and a $200,000 fine, or when he was ejected for headbutting a referee. All of these things were nuts. But a lot of stuff really came to light when the show The Last Dance was released. Like when he straight up skipped the team practice during the '98 finals. I mean, this is the NBA finals we're talking about. Just because he wanted to appear at a WCW wrestling event with Hulk Hogan. But that was just who he was. It was never a question about whether Rodman would make headlines. It was always a question of when he would make the headlines. And teams could live with that. After all, he won 5 championships over the course of his career, so he was clearly doing something right. But his crazy and memorable moments went much further than just on the court. So let's dive into that behavior, starting with possibly the weirdest of them all. In 1996, Rodman came out as bisexual, which honestly was not really surprising given everything else he's done. But the weirdest part about it is that he married himself. Yeah, you heard that right. Himself. He dressed himself up in a big white wedding dress, showing off his self-love, and was driven around in a horse-drawn carriage in New York City. It was partially to help promote his book, Bad As I Wanna Be, but there was definitely some part of him that just wanted to do this for his own enjoyment. Speaking of enjoying himself, in 2013, Rodman called into a radio show while getting some slop, and while you normally can't find someone who has done something crazier than that, Rodman is a special case. He has testified on video that he has broken his dick 3 separate times, he tried having a child with Madonna, and of course, he had his marriage with Carmen Electra, but in Rodman fashion, none of his relationships lasted long at all. Rodman's career was a pure sympathy of chaos and genius. The way he talks about the art of rebounding shows that he didn't just go into games like a bull in a china shop, but then you hear about all of the wild shit he did off the court, and your perception completely shifts back. Now, it's hard to find someone to follow behind Rodman, but this next guy has a nickname that speaks for itself. This is the Henny God, J.R. Smith. The former NBA Sixth Man of the Year turned college golfer has certainly had his fair share of embarrassing moments. But before we go into some of those moments, it must be stated that Smith was one of the most electrifying shooting guards of his generation. Although he wasn't always there mentally, when he was on, he was on. He played a crucial role in the 2016 Cavaliers finals run by playing his role and staying efficient, after of which he refused to wear a shirt for a while, but that's beyond the point. Even though he would have these shining moments of efficient hoops, he would be tagged as a dumb player with a low basketball IQ. I mean, the end of regulation in Game 1 of the 2018 finals pretty much sums it up, as he grabbed an offensive rebound with a chance to win, and unaware of the score, dribbled the clock out. But you can't really label someone with a low IQ as a crash out, so let me tell you a story. Back in 2018, J.R. Smith made headlines off the court when he reportedly threw a bowl of soup at former NBA player turned assistant coach Damon Jones. He would be suspended for 1 game after the incident, but the bizarre event just fanned the flames even more, and reinforced his reputation as an erratic and unpredictable guy. When you couldn't even rely on a guy to play defense because there was a chance he was going to go over and hug a friend, there are going to be some question marks. But let's move on from this soup-throwing assassin, and look at Stephon Marbury, who had flashes of brilliance throughout his career, but just couldn't hold it together. After getting drafted by the Timberwolves, Marbury quickly teamed up with Kevin Garnett, and the two were deadly. It was looking like the two together could help lead the Timberwolves to loads of success, but Marbury's jealousy simply got in the way. There are stories that it was because Minnesota was unfamiliar to him, but the fact that KG was the big dog after signing a $126 million contract was glaring. And so, rather than staying with Garnett and the T-Wolves, Marbury decided to sign with the New Jersey Nets, stripping us of the possible championships and accolades that we could have seen racked up with KG. With the Nets, he would put up big numbers, but he could not rack up big wins. In 2004, he would be traded to the New York Knicks, and this is where things all fell apart. Like with the Nets, Marbury struggled to find team success, and part of why that was because he had a knack for picking fights with his coaches. First of all, we have Larry Brown, a coach who just wanted to bring some structure to the Knicks, but with Marbury at the helm, yeah, not gonna happen. The two would get into verbal brawls, and the team struggled, and at a point, it was so bad that Brown was nearing his end with the Knicks. Although he still had around $40 million on his contract, he would be fired and receive $18.5 million in severance pay. But in his place came Isaiah Thomas, who had now become both the coach and the general manager, but that didn't go any better. Well, first of all, Thomas should have known better than to try and bench Marbury in the first place, because when Marbury found out, things spiraled out of control. Stephon reportedly said, "Isaiah has to start me. I've got so much stuff on Isaiah and he knows it. He thinks he can get me, but I'll get him first. You have no idea what I know." But even with this statement, Marbury was benched, and eventually dropped from the rotation completely. But when you watched just a single interview with Marbury, the takeaway was that he was just a weird dude, or maybe he was just high, I don't really know. On live TV, Marbury admitted to kissing his sister and feeling her body. Come on, man, it really can't get much weirder than that.
We kept it in the family. She been praying for this day forever, and it finally happened yesterday when I kissed her. What? And I felt her body and I felt her soul. Jesus. I was delighted to be kissing her. I couldn't even cry because I knew they were going to be happy tears, so I was able to control them. You only really cry when they really bad stuff.
After the Knicks, Marbury would have one more year with the Boston Celtics, if that's what you'd call it, because he only appeared in 23 regular season games. But after leaving the NBA, Marbury would completely lose control. He made headlines in 2009 after a completely incoherent livestream that included wild dancing, crying, and at one point eating vaseline because his throat hurt. But just when it seemed like Marbury had run himself into the ground, he revitalized himself by going over to China to play ball. He would play from 2010 to 2018 and embraced his teammates and the culture how he should have done in the NBA, and showed a side of himself that fans thought was gone forever. The toxic reputation that he left behind was certainly still there, but he was fixing himself. He won 3 championships for the city of Beijing and picked up coaching when his playing days were over, but nothing can erase the videos and the memories of his haunting past and the thoughts of what could have been. But next, here's another guy who could never quite reach the top. DeMarcus Cousins was once considered the top big man in the league and would lead the Sacramento Kings from the moment he was drafted, but he would never take them to the playoffs. Now, the Kings have never been a powerhouse team in the league, but with Cousins, it felt like they were just a couple pieces away. But even once he got a couple pieces like Rudy Gay, the Kings couldn't improve, and Cousins was moved to New Orleans. But why was that the case? Well, certainly the Kings were incompetent, but Cousins himself, well, Cousins wasn't exactly known for keeping a cool head. He pushed an assistant coach for the Bulls, threw opponents to the ground, and was even suspended for picking up too many techs in the 2012-2013 season. But still, he was the star player of this team, so why would the Kings just ship him away? It comes as no surprise that Boogie was a little bit upset when he wasn't finding any success, and he made that very clear. And when the Kings hired George Karl, things got worse, because Karl didn't want to lose either. But after falling to 1-7 in the 15-16 season, Cousins stormed into the locker room and let out a torrent of obscenities to Karl. Of course, Karl wanted to suspend Cousins for his actions, but GM Vlade Divac undermined and overruled Karl, and Cousins was not suspended. But after the incident, it was clear that the DeMarcus Cousins-led Kings wasn't going to be forever. But the Kings weren't quite ready to let go, and waited until the next season to trade him to the Pelicans, where he would create a dominant frontcourt duo with Anthony Davis. Then the injury problems came. First, he tore his Achilles, which proved to be disastrous for his career. He was in line to get a massive contract, but the Pelicans wouldn't even re-sign him, and he signed with the Warriors, which started his years and years of being an NBA journeyman. Because just as he was able to get back into the swing of things, he would tear his quad and then his ACL. Even though he proved he could contribute some solid minutes to teams that needed him, his years of drama-filled play both on and off the court made teams reluctant to sign him. By 2023, Boogie was completely out of the league and went to play for the Taiwan Beer Leopards, and most recently signed with a team in Mongolia. He had all the tools to be successful, but could never keep it together because of his temper with the Kings as well as the mismanagement. And unfortunately, injuries derailed a rather legendary career. But Cousins seems to be a pretty chill guy compared to Ron Artest. Ron came into the league with the Bulls in the post-MJ era, with the bulk of it as a starter. He showed that he had raw defensive potential, but he was also a little bit of a liability. Many years after the fact, Artest confessed that he used to drink Hennessy during halftime, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. During his rookie season, he applied and got a job working at Circuit City just to get discounts and employee perks. Mind you, he was making more than $1 million in that season alone. But things really started to unravel after he was traded to the Indiana Pacers, where he became the Ron Artest that we know about today. He started his time with the Pacers by winning the Defensive Player of the Year award, and it was looking like Artest was going to be a problem for opposing teams for years to come. But then came his defining moment. On November 19, 2004, Artest was the catalyst for what we now know as the Malice at the Palace. With under a minute left in the game, Artest committed a hard foul on Ben Wallace, and things got a little bit chippy on the court. But then, a fan threw a drink at Artest, and all hell broke loose. Artest jumped into the crowd, but had no idea who actually threw the drink, so he was pretty much just attacking random fans. It was ugly, and the league needed to make an example out of him. And so, they suspended him for the rest of the season and the postseason, which would end up being 86 games, as the incident happened in just the 9th game of the season. It was the worst fight in the history of the NBA. But even after Artest came back from his suspension, he continued on with his self-destructive tendencies. First, he sabotaged his spot on the Indiana Pacers by requesting a trade because he believed they would be better off without him, and so they traded him to the Sacramento Kings. But it wouldn't be anything close to a fresh start in California, because he only got himself into more trouble. He gave fans glimpses of his former self becoming a defensive staple once again, but that didn't matter as much because of the noise he was making off the floor. From fines to suspensions to an arrest for domestic violence, Artest's time with the Kings was rough. But after a year with the Rockets, he would sign on with the Lakers to join Kobe Bean Bryant as he chased another NBA title. And in his first year with the team, he played a crucial role, picking up significant minutes and even hitting a clutch three to help the Lakers secure a Game 7 victory in the NBA Finals. In the next year, he changed his name to Metta World Peace, but even with that name that just sounds so nice, he still had his moments of recklessness. Like in 2012 when James Harden got the people's elbow from him. He would slowly make his way out of the league, and he certainly left a legacy that will be remembered and even still makes headlines. He would become an advocate for mental health and has appeared on various reality TV shows. Whether you remember him as Artest or World Peace, you can't deny that he has been one of the most fascinating players in NBA history. Next up, we have Latrell Sprewell, who ruined his career just as he got settled in the league. Although he came into the league as the 24th pick, Sprewell didn't take long to get into the All-Star game, doing so in his second year. He reached the All-Star game in 2 of his next 3 seasons, but the next year, he committed one of the most shocking acts in NBA history. During a practice in 1997 with the Golden State Warriors, Latrell Sprewell put his coach PJ Carlesimo in a chokehold. He was dragged off of his coach and left the arena. But then, about 20 minutes later, he came back and continued the attack on Carlesimo by throwing a punch. Carlesimo was known for his aggressive coaching style, but nowhere near the point where he needed to be choked out. The NBA punished Sprewell with a 68-game suspension, and his contract was voided. But his response? I wasn't choking PJ that hard. I mean, he could breathe. During his suspension, he would be charged with reckless driving for a role in an incident that injured 2 people and would spend 3 months under house arrest. But after a whole season with no play, Sprewell would look to revive his career as he joined the New York Knicks. He would have 4 years of consistent and pretty efficient basketball and even appear in another All-Star game, but even that would involve some controversy as well. Before the 02-03 season, Sprewell showed up to training camp with a broken hand that he had not reported to the team beforehand, and was handed a hefty $250,000 fine. It was rumored that he had broken his hand in a fight, and although Sprewell filed a lawsuit against the newspaper that started that rumor, he would lose it. After his time with the Knicks, he would go to Minnesota and would be a big role player in a Western Conference Finals appearance. But after getting offered an extension for $21 million, he turned it down saying, "I have a family to feed." This would end up being a killer for his career, because although he would have 1 more year with the team, he would have career lows and no other team would be willing to meet his demands. He had too high of an asking price for the abilities that he still had and would never play another NBA game again. Since retiring, he has had his $1.5 million yacht repossessed. A few months later, he would have his Milwaukee-based home repossessed, and has also been arrested for disorderly conduct and had some issues with paying taxes and various other financial issues. When looking back on his career, he was clearly gifted, he had the skill, but his temper and inability to control himself killed the progress that he had made. And last but certainly not least, we've got the round mound of rebound, Charles Barkley. Now, Barkley has now become one of the most loved characters in the sports media world alongside the rest of the Inside the NBA crew. But because of that role, people seem to forget about all of the wild moments that took place over the course of his career. After going 5th overall in the '84 draft, Barkley quickly became known for not just his proficient scoring and rebound, but also his tendencies to clash with coaches and mouth off to referees. But you could argue that back then, the game was just tougher, although that simply wasn't the case for Barkley, as he had some one-of-a-kind moments. Like in 1991 when he got into it with a heckling New Jersey fan. There have always been and always will be hecklers, but this one had Barkley extra pissed off. And once Chuck had enough, he spit into the crowd in the fan's general direction. But rather than hitting the heckling fan, he ended up spitting onto a little girl, which plagued his reputation for the rest of his career. While he apologized and tried to do his best to make things right, you can't really just leave something like that in the past. A few years later, he made headlines away from the sport world when he got himself into a little bar fight which resulted in a fan getting thrown out of the window. An out-of-court settlement would land the man around $75,000, which was more of a slap on the wrist to Barkley than anything, but again, it just added another negative story to Barkley's reputation. It was clear that Barkley was never scared of getting physical, and the same happened on the court, as shown by his various fights. Notably in the moments like in 1990 when he got into it with Bill Laimbeer and ended up starting an entire brawl with the Bad Boys Pistons, or closer to the end of his career when he got into it with current co-host Shaquille O'Neal. But at least Barkley was aware of the precedent that he was setting. He even starred in a Nike commercial that had the tagline, "I am not a role model," so that should tell you all you need to know. But apart from his controversial moments, it cannot be denied that Barkley was a beast. The MVP winner and 11-time All-Star was a force. And while he never won a championship in his time in the NBA, he has gone down as one of the best to ever do so. If you made it this far, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.